Boy, do we got a show for you today. On today's episode of the Shadow People podcast, we go over the 1980 horror film Cannibal Holocaust. Alright, what to say about Cannibal Holocaust? There's so much to say. There's a lot of firsts for this film. I had a plan on doing films that couldn't be made these days, and when you think about it, this is like one of the main films that couldn't be made these days for a whole bunch of reasons. My top reason is for PETA being involved. I think they killed like 6 or 7 different type of animals in the film, and they actually killed the animals. They killed a turtle, I know some squirrels, they killed a monkey and eat his brains, and I remember reading up on it, and the director really regrets doing all of this. He didn't want to kill all these animals, but he was going for authenticity, so he pretty much had to. I know he's spoken out several times saying he really regrets making those decisions. He backs up those decisions by saying he gave the meat to the tribesmen, which is a good thing. So either way, however you want to say it, that's one of the reasons that this film couldn't be made these days. The original name for Cannibal Holocaust was supposed to be The Green Inferno. Director Ruggero Deodato had changed this because a lot of people were telling them it needs to have a more impactful type title, and Holocaust is a scary word, so they convinced him. Eli Roth was very influenced by Ruggero Deodato. Not only did he pay homage in his film The Green Inferno by taking his name, but he also allowed him a cameo role in the sequel to Hostel, in which he plays an Italian cannibal. I love the director. He has a trilogy of cannibal films, this one being his second. Foreign films, specifically Italian films, is they're not afraid to push that button. They're not afraid to take it to the edge, and that's what makes good directors like that's what makes good directors like Dario Argento, Luciano Fulci, Ruggero Deodato, that they're not afraid to push that edge, so much to the point that when 10 days after this film's released, the director was locked up on obscenity charges and later faced murder charges because it was believed that the murders in this film were real, and they thought he really killed a bunch of freaking American actors. He made them sign a contract pretty much pledging a step away from the spotlight and not be shown for about a year. And during his trial, he had to get in contact with these actors and convince these actors to come before a judge to prove that they weren't dead. In the trial, one of the actresses had to explain how they did the impalement scene on a stake, and what I read, I haven't seen any documentaries on this, but from what I've read, she sat on a motorcycle or a bicycle behind this prop with a piece of balsa wood in her mouth, so it made her look like she was impaled, which is freaking awesome. The cinematography on this film, there's a lot of wide shots. For the 80s though, it looked very real, very realistic from the point of the tribes, and from the point some of the murders looked a lot fake, I could tell in the editing, but I mean, if you're seeing this in the 1980s, we're desensitized now, so a lot has changed since then. The film was made with a modest budget of $100,000, and I believe on its initial release it made like $2 million just by word of mouth, for the reason of the director being brought up on charges of not only obscenity but murder. The film was banned, I believe they said in 50 countries. I'm not sure how many countries, like how accurate that is, but I know a lot of countries up until recently have banned this film. Also, I want to make one point that it is one of the first, if not the very first, found footage film. The Blair Witch Project is one of the films that is coveted as the first found footage film. Well, there have been reportedly up to 5 beforehand, but what the Blair Witch Project did was it revolutionized found footage using its advertisement method through the internet. The internet was a new thing. If Cannibal Holocaust had the internet when it was advertising, it would have broke the internet. It would have went insane. Blair Witch had great use of the internet. A lot of people did believe that it was a true happening, and same thing for when Cannibal Holocaust came out, except Cannibal Holocaust was just word of mouth. So the plot of this film, basically the undertone and the plot of this film is no one really gives a shit about third world countries unless white people get lost in it, because from the very second that this film opens, it talks about these 4 people that got lost on an excavation to the Amazon. They were doing a documentary, they got lost, so they end up sending some soldiers after them. They look like Colombian soldiers or something like that. So they send some soldiers with another documentary team or a professor after them, and this professor finds their remains and the video of what happened to them. Hence the little bit of found footage. After seeing the film, Italian director Sergio Leone, who is often credited as the inventor of the spaghetti western, had written the director Ruggero Deodato and told him that it was a masterpiece on a cinematic level that he hadn't seen in a long time, which I agree. You take a film like The Green Inferno and just see how much influence Cannibal Holocaust had on this, then you have other films that try to copycat it. There's Cannibal Feroz. I don't know how many Amazon rainforest films that were made in this vein, and it just goes to show what kind of cinematic masterpiece that this was. Also, you want to look on influences in this film. I don't think that the directors ever came out and said it, but the guys from Blair Witch, you can tell, were very heavily influenced. As I stated, the great Eli Roth and his film The Green Inferno were very heavily influenced by this film. Paco Plaza, the director, or one of the filmmakers from the Record series, which, if you don't know the Record series, the American version is Quarantine and Quarantine 2. The guy who made that series is very, very heavily influenced by Ruggero Deodato and his film Cannibal Holocaust. The film also has influences in death metal. Many bands have sung about this movie, which is pretty cool. I like how a lot of death metal takes from horror films. Films like Evil Dead, Dead by Dawn is a big example in that. This film has really reached a wide audience, a wide scope of people. If you haven't seen it, I highly suggest it. I give it a 3 out of 5. The only reason I'm giving it a 3, I think the editing doesn't really do it for me, even though at the time this editing was thought of as pretty good. What really doesn't give it for me is there's a scene where, I think it's the first scene where you see one of the cannibals really going at one of the Americans, and basically this guy takes a real phallic looking rock and penetrates the woman with it and then bashes her head. And when he's bashing her head, and it doesn't really look all that authentic. But then again, in the 1980s, I'm desensitized now, so in the 1980s I'm pretty sure it was a little bit different. Alright, that does it for this week's episode of the Shadow People podcast. Thank you for sitting and talking with me about the 1980s horror Cannibal Holocaust. Until next week, when we speak about Sleepaway Camp and other camp movies of the 1980s, such as Friday the 13th, the one to start them all.